Hi, Damali here from Forerunner Counseling. This is for Weekly Wisdom. I'm here to talk to you about the differences between trauma wounding and attachment wounding. So many times we experience a lot of emotional suffering or emotional pain and not knowing why we're experiencing what we're experiencing. So when people come to therapy, they're trying to understand why am I doing what I'm doing? How can I alleviate the symptoms or where do they come from without knowing what is necessarily going on. So when we think about our individual emotional well-being, the journey to emotional wellness starts from when we are young at a very infant stage, actually from conception, because sometimes we get wounded in the womb, prenatal wounding, they call it. And so there are two categories of childhood wounding that there is. We have trauma wounding and we have attachment woundings. But a lot of times, many people all categorize all of it to be trauma. So what's the difference? Trauma wounding is more so coming from the wounds that come as a result of physical and safety needs not being met. Now, wounding means every time there is a need and it's not met, that is what a wound means. That's what causes a wound. It could be emotional, it could be physical, it could be verbal, it could be spiritual, but that's what that is, a wound. An emotional wound is when you have a need and then it's not met, that's when you get wounded. So when it comes to trauma, these are physical and safety needs that have not been met. Now, when it comes to trauma, we have trauma that is mostly caused by experiencing or witnessing distressing or overwhelming life-threatening events. We have traumatic events that could be based off of natural disasters. Those are now not relational trauma. They have nothing to do with your physical well-being, but it has to do with your environment. These are non-relational. We have relational trauma. We also have non-relational trauma. So when you experience like natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, floodings, earthquakes, those are natural disasters that are non-relational, but they are traumatic. So we have violence, like experiencing, let's say, riots. We experience wars. We experience like things where there is so much abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, things like that. That is all considered to be trauma that is non-relational per se, right? And when we go into physical trauma or relational trauma, this is the wounding that is resulting from the lack of safety, the lack of trust in the relationship. So imagine at a very young age, if you're growing up in an environment where you don't physically feel safe, or it's very difficult to trust the person that is supposed to be your caregiver or your caretaker, you don't feel that sense of trust. So you experience trauma that is resulting from the relationship of that caregiver. It could be a parent, it could be another adult, it could be a teacher or anybody else. So some of the symptoms that are related to experiencing trauma could be, or trauma wounding could be flashbacks. You know, a lot of times, so for example, I hope this is not normal to you, but if you've ever been in a car accident, every time you go to the scene where the accident happened, your brain kind of remembers that event like it just happened. And so there is a tendency to experience flashbacks. That's when you know this is a trauma-related wound. You experience nightmares, there is a hypervigilance, there is emotional numbness. So, and a lot of times when people come to therapy, they are manifesting the symptoms of trauma because those symptoms are a way that we coped, the body coped like that. So we go into like what they call fight or flight. But as a result, you're also numbing in a sense of coping with that pain, that emotional, that overwhelming of lack of safety or lack of trust that you just don't feel anything, or you get shocked like out of a hurricane. And I think my easiest one that I have related with is mostly experiencing a car accident and a flooding. So when it goes to a car accident, I can see the numbness coming into play, but your body comes up with a way to cope with that pain and it numbs. And so there is also a tendency to have a difficult time concentrating. And some people, when they are interacting, they feel like they are having an ADHD brain because they are already like they concentrate for short periods of time and they go somewhere. They cannot sit in one space for a very long period of time. It could also be a temperamental issue, but most times when you have trauma, there is a difficulty to concentrate. And when you think about, let's say if you've gone through a hurricane or if you've gone through a war, how much time can you concentrate on one thing? Your brain is scattered all over the place. It's very difficult to concentrate because there's so much information going through and it's not one particular scenario that you're processing. So it also can create a sense of disconnection from yourself and sometimes even from others because you detach as a way of survive and sometimes you don't come back. Not that it's supposed to be permanent, but if you don't have the tools, you don't know how to come back. And so these symptoms often arise as a result of the brain's natural response to protect itself during such a traumatic event. That's why you can see those disconnection and detachment and things like that. Okay, so that is what trauma looks like with events, but I've also described it sometimes when it comes to relationship, when you don't feel safe. They are yelling at you, they are screaming at you, they are beating you up, and they are calling you names and all that other things. So that's trauma. Or sexually abusing you, violating you. And so when you experience such events, then you're going through trauma, whether it's physical or non-relational. And then we have attachment woundings. Attachment wounding is what results from lack of emotional needs being met, right? So when we are little, we all have the needs to feel like we are encouraged, we are surprised, or we are delighted in, we are cherished, we are attuned to, that our emotional needs are met, but the caregiver are tuning into us. And a lot of times, because our caregivers also have their own lives that they had to deal with. Maybe they didn't even process their own traumas growing up, that they just kind of by default, we are stuck in their own journeys. So they are not fully available to attune to us the way we needed them or we need them to. And so we get emotional wounding, that is attachment wounding. We don't feel emotionally secure in those relationships. So as a result, we experience neglect, we experience physical threats or failure. If the people who are taking care of us are not able to attune to us, we feel like we are not going to be okay. You know, children need parents, but parents don't need children. I mean, like when you have little ones, you see them following the adults around, even to the bathroom. You know, you can't take a shower, you can't go to the bathroom because they are consistently following you. Now, we can look at it like they're annoying, but in reality, in their physical, emotional well-being, they don't think that they'll be okay if you leave them. So if you're constantly being neglected and abandoned, you're going to get wounded as a result of those things. So those negative experiences or disruptions that come to you in your early childhood, where your ability to bond in relationships is really affected, that's where the wounding comes from. Now, these attachment wounds cannot be ignored, right? Because attachment is a very fundamental aspect of our human developing, because one of the things is that it shapes our capacity for our emotional connections in adult. It shapes our ability to trust, and it shapes our ability to be intimate throughout the course of life. So when these needs are not adequately met during childhood, it can really create a lot of wounds. And some of the wounds that are experienced, such as neglect or inconsistent caregiving, or even just the abuse from the primary caregivers. And some of our parents may be caregivers, we are just not there. They were struggling with their own, maybe substance abuse or whatever the situation may have been, that they have created wounds that make it very difficult for us to form secure attachments with others in adult relationships. And sometimes we have a difficulty regulating our own emotions, so we cannot engage fully in adult, healthy, trusting relationships. So some of the symptoms you're going to experience in attachment wounding, and sometimes people have both trauma and attachment wounding. So some of the symptoms with attachment wounding is very difficult to form close relationships, meaning that you have a fear of abandonment. Every time you feel like someone is going to get close to you, your system is going to feel like they're not going to be fully there for me. So sometimes we just go to the extreme left where we just avoid any form of closeness with us. And so every time the person try to get close to you, you get triggered. It's overwhelming. It's too much, and you just want your space. You want to get away from all of it. And sometimes you have a fear of being abandoned, whereby we behave in ways that actually cause people to abandon us. I recently did a webinar called I Hate You, But Don't Leave Me, whereby we behave in such ways that push people away, but we are trying to avoid being abandoned. But the behaviors that we are manifesting is causing people to have no choice but to leave us. And if you have experienced attachment wounding, chances are that you have very low self-esteem because you did not develop a strong sense of yourself. You don't know who you are. You don't have boundaries. It's very difficult to know where you begin and other people stop. So you end up either people pleasing, bending over backwards, and sometimes even to lose your whole sense of self so that you can survive. That's what children do. In other words, we are stuck in childhood traumas and childhood attachment wounds. And so there is also like a constant feeling of emptiness whereby no matter what you do, it's not, you're detached. You feel like something is always missing. And so as a result, people feel stuck emotionally and they don't know how to navigate those areas. So I just want to invite you, if you experienced, I think most of us have experienced some form of wounding, whether it's trauma or attachment wounds, but the difference in treating these wounds is not always the same because trauma has to be healed a different way and needs have to be met in such a way that there is a way to feel safe, there is a way to securely attach. And so if you experience some of these areas that you feel like you need to develop more into your skill set, I just want to invite you into my skills groups, small groups where we meet every 2 times a month, the second Monday and the fourth Monday of every month, where we are going to equip you. If you don't know the difference between what your woundings are, that's the first thing that we're going to help you to navigate. Now, I want to clarify that this is not going to kind of replace your therapy. This is just like a supporting group for you to get more tools, for you to get more skills in coping with trauma, in coping with attachment wounding, so that you feel like you can regulate. I know the times you're living in are not the easiest. There is so much triggers all over the globe. There are so many wars in Europe, in Israel and everything. So you could easily get stuck in life these days if you're not mindful. So if you're interested in this, please click the link below and you can be part of our journey, part of the group where you can participate in the small groups, get the skills that you need, get the tools that you need so that you can grow in your emotional and mental stability. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on forerunnercounseling.com and also on my social media platforms, but also if you can register and you can subscribe. I'm actually also having a class coming up on January 20th. This is a class for healing the heart from a spiritual perspective. If you really want to touch some of those areas of wounding and trauma from a spiritual standpoint, please go and register for that course. It's called Heart Healing 2024. It starts on January 20th, beginning at 9 a.m. To 10:30. So I can't wait to meet you all there. So thank you so much.